Shari and Martell Holt were seen as a strong and inspiring couple. On screen, they appeared to be building a successful life together, running businesses, raising their children, and growing their brand as a team. To fans watching their journey on Love and Marriage Huntsville, they looked like a true power couple who had everything figured out. But what the public saw was only part of the story. Behind the image of success and unity, their relationship was quietly breaking down. Over time, small issues turned into bigger conflicts and trust began to weaken. Living under public attention made things even harder because their private struggles often became public conversations. Every argument, every emotional moment, and every mistake was discussed by viewers online, leaving little space for privacy or healing. Eventually, serious betrayal changed everything. The relationship that once looked solid became one of the most talked about breakups on reality TV. Fans were divided, arguing over who was right and whether the marriage could still be saved. But while the public debated, Melody and Martell were dealing with the emotional damage in real time. As things progressed, Melody began to withdraw emotionally. Instead of constantly responding to drama, she became more private and focused on protecting her peace. She shifted her attention toward rebuilding her life rather than defending the past. It became clear she was slowly detaching from the chaos around her. Later, she made a major decision. She left Love and Marriage Huntsville after 9 seasons. At first, some people thought it was just a rumor, but it turned out to be true. Her exit wasn't loud or dramatic. She didn't give long explanations or emotional speeches. She simply stepped away. For many viewers, this showed growth. It felt like she was choosing healing over reliving pain and peace over public conflict. After her departure, Martell remained silent for a while, which made fans even more curious. When he finally spoke, his tone was calmer and more reflective than many expected. Instead of focusing on blame, he talked about growth, lessons learned, and realizing the value of someone after losing them. This divided the audience. Some people saw it as genuine maturity and personal growth. Others felt it was regret coming too late, after too much damage had already been done. In reality, people change in different ways and at different speeds. Real growth is not just about words, it shows in consistent actions over time. What stood out most, however, was Melody's continued silence. She didn't respond to his comments or re-enter public arguments. She stayed focused on her own life, her family, and her future. To many, that silence felt powerful. It suggested she had moved past the need to explain or revisit old pain. Meanwhile, Martell still appeared to be reflecting on the past, while Melody seemed focused on moving forward. That contrast made the situation even more noticeable to viewers. In the end, their story is not just about a breakup or reality TV drama. It reflects real-life lessons about trust, accountability, and emotional growth. Sometimes love exists, but it's not enough to hold everything together when hurt keeps repeating. For Melody, this chapter represents independence and healing. For Martell, it represents reflection and regret. And for the audience, it serves as a reminder that relationships are shaped not just by love, but by actions, choices, and respect over time. Sometimes life doesn't give perfect endings, it gives clarity. And once people see that clearly, they have no choice but to move forward in their own direction. After everything that happened, both of them seemed to enter completely different phases of life. For Melody, life slowly started to feel lighter. Stepping away from constant drama gave her space to focus on herself again. Instead of being pulled into public arguments or revisiting painful memories, she began prioritizing her peace, her children, and her personal growth. Over time, she appeared more grounded, less reactive, and more intentional about what she allowed into her life. People noticed that she no longer tried to explain her every move or respond to every opinion online. That change spoke for itself. It wasn't about proving anything anymore, it was about moving on for real. Meanwhile, Martell's journey looked different. He continued reflecting on the past and speaking about lessons learned. At times, his words suggested regret and a deeper understanding of what went wrong in the relationship. But for many viewers, the question remained the same. Was he truly changing, or simply realizing things after losing them? That uncertainty is what kept people talking. Because in situations like this, words are easy, but rebuilding trust, especially after public damage, is much harder and takes time. As the months passed, it became more obvious that their paths were no longer connected. One person was focused on healing and rebuilding a new chapter, while the other was still processing what had already ended. That difference created distance that couldn't be ignored. And maybe that is the final lesson in their story. Not every relationship ends with closure between two people. Sometimes it ends with understanding arriving at different times. Sometimes one person lets go while the other is still trying to make sense of what happened. And sometimes the most powerful decision is not to argue, not to explain, but simply to move forward. In the end, what remains is growth. Pain fades, lessons stay, and people evolve in ways they don't always expect. And for both of them, life continues not as a shared story anymore, but as two separate journeys shaped by everything they went through together. As time continued to pass, the silence between them said more than any public statement ever could. There were no more joint appearances, no shared updates, and no signs of returning to what they once were. What used to be a very public relationship slowly became two separate lives moving in completely different directions. For Melody, that separation seemed to bring stability. She focused more on her own identity outside of the relationship and the show. The version of her that people saw afterward felt more confident and self-contained, as if she had finally stepped out of a long emotional storm. Instead of being tied to past conflicts, she began shaping a future on her own terms. Martell, on the other hand, continued to reflect publicly at times, often expressing thoughts about growth and missed opportunities. But reflection without change can only go so far in the eyes of the audience. Many viewers wanted to see consistency, real, long-term change that matched the words being spoken. That difference in perception kept the conversation alive, even though the relationship itself had already ended. Eventually, people stopped expecting reconciliation and started accepting reality. The focus shifted away from what could have been to what is now. And what was clear now was that both individuals were trying to move forward in their own ways, even if their healing timelines didn't match. What makes their story resonate with so many people is not just the fame or the drama, but the emotional truth behind it. It shows how love can exist, but still not be enough when trust is broken too deeply. It shows how success on the outside doesn't protect a relationship from internal struggles. And it shows how public pressure can make private healing even harder. In the end, there was no dramatic final moment that tied everything together. No perfect closure scene. Just two people learning, in very different ways, how to live with the consequences of what they went through. And that is often how real life works. Not clean endings, but slow acceptance, personal growth, and eventually, peace found separately rather than together. As life moved forward, the gap between their worlds only became clearer. The chapter they once wrote together was no longer active, and both of them had to adjust to a reality where their names were no longer tied as one story, but as two separate journeys shaped by the past. For Melody, that meant continuing to build a life that felt steady and self-directed. She no longer seemed interested in revisiting old conflicts or getting pulled back into emotional cycles that once defined her public image. Instead, her focus stayed on protecting her energy and creating a healthier environment for herself and her family. Over time, that consistency made a difference. She appeared more settled, less weighed down by history, and more comfortable in her own space. Martell's path remained more complicated in the public eye. Even as he spoke about lessons and personal growth, many people still associated him with the mistakes and tensions from the past. That kind of public memory is difficult to escape. It takes more than reflection. It requires time, accountability, and visible change that people can see, not just hear. Because of that, his journey continued under scrutiny. Every statement, every appearance, and every comment was analyzed through the lens of what had already happened. That pressure made it harder for his message of growth to fully land with everyone. Still, one thing became undeniable. Both lives had changed permanently because of what they went through together. There was no returning to the version of life they once shared. The relationship had shaped them, but it no longer defined where they were going. And maybe that is the quiet truth behind the entire story. Some relationships don't end with resolution. They end with distance, with understanding that comes too late, or healing that happens separately, with lessons that only make sense after everything is already over. In the end, what remains is not the relationship itself, but the people they become after it. Stronger in some ways, more cautious in others, and permanently changed by experiences they once thought would last forever. And as both continue forward on their own paths, the story no longer belongs to the past. It belongs to what each of them chooses to build next. As the years moved on, the situation gradually stopped being about conflict and started becoming about reflection. What once dominated headlines and online discussions slowly turned into a settled reality. The relationship was over, and both people were living with the consequences in their own ways. For Melody, this phase of life seemed to be about rebuilding without noise. She no longer appeared interested in public back and forth or revisiting emotional history. Instead, she focused on stability, family, and personal direction. The change wasn't sudden, it was steady, the kind that comes when someone decides they are done repeating the same emotional cycle. With time, that choice created distance not just from the past relationship, but from the emotional weight that came with it. Martell's perspective, however, continued to be shaped by reflection. He often spoke about lessons learned and the importance of understanding what went wrong. But for many observers, the real question was whether understanding alone was enough. People wanted to see consistency over time, actions that matched the awareness he expressed. Without that, opinions remained divided, and the conversation around his growth stayed uncertain. What made their story linger in public discussion wasn't just what happened, but how differently each of them seemed to process it. One moved towards silence and separation from the past, while the other continued to engage with it in words and reflection. Eventually, even the audience began to shift. The curiosity that once fueled debates started fading into acceptance. People stopped asking whether the relationship could be repaired and started acknowledging that it had already run its course. And that's where the deeper meaning of their story becomes clear. Not every ending comes with closure between two people. Some endings come with distance, silence, and separate healing journeys. Some people grow by walking away from what hurts them, while others grow by slowly understanding what went wrong after it's already gone. In the end, there is no shared conclusion, only individual progress. Melody's path reflects moving forward without looking back. Martell's reflects learning through reflection and time. And the audience is left with a reminder that real relationships are not just built on love, but on trust, timing, choices, and the ability to sustain them under pressure. When those pieces break, sometimes the story doesn't end neatly, it simply separates. And what remains is life continuing forward, in two different directions, with lessons that both carry, even if they carry them differently. As time moved further away from the height of the drama, the focus around Melody, Shari, and Martell Holt began to shift again, not toward what they were as a couple, but how they functioned as individuals connected by history and children. One of the most important realities that remained between them was co-parenting. Even after the emotional separation, life still required communication, structure, and responsibility. That meant that, despite distance and past tension, there were still moments where coordination was necessary. But those interactions were no longer shaped by relationship dynamics, they were shaped by boundaries. Over time, that shift brought a different kind of stability. Not harmony in the romantic sense, but a clearer understanding of limits. Conversations became more direct, less emotional, and more focused on practical matters. For viewers who once watched their intense arguments unfold publicly, this quieter version of interaction felt almost unfamiliar. Meanwhile, public perception also began evolving. The audience that once chose sides started to settle into a more reflective view of the situation. Instead of debating every detail, people began acknowledging that both individuals had contributed to a relationship that ultimately couldn't sustain itself. The conversation slowly moved from blame to accountability and from accountability to acceptance. For Melody, this continued period of distance reinforced her identity outside of the relationship. She was no longer primarily discussed in relation to her past marriage.